Welcome to Conversations on the Coast, the Bay Area's premier author interview program. And today we're going to talk to one of America's best biographers. Her name is Carolyn Burke, and her newest book is called No Regrets, The Life of Edith Piaf, and it's published by our friends at Alfred A. Knopf. Welcome. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me.
You know, these other biographies that you've done, you know, the little squibs, like absolutely fascinating folks. You did a biography about a woman named Lee Miller.
That's right.
And one thinks that it could be a man, but not when you see her picture.
She was such a great beauty. She chose the name Lee deliberately. Her real name was Elizabeth. And when she became a photographer, she wanted to have the benefit of not being placeable. So she chose a name that would...
Yeah, that's good. I mean, if you're Mary whatever, it's a woman, I don't want her.
That's right. That's what she was thinking.
That's a good idea. And then your next subject is a book called it's a book about Mina Loy.
Right, whom a lot of people assume must have been Myrna.
Yeah, I kept saying that must be a typo.
No, it's a funny story. For years when I was working on that book, my working title, a bit of a joke, was Not Myrna.
Not a bad idea.
Well, we think, but I couldn't get confirmation from Myrna Loy when she was alive, that she chose her screen name because of Mina Loy, who was a well-known avant-garde poet at the time in the 20s when young Myrna was a starlet.
and the title of that book is Becoming Modern, The Life of Mina Loy.
Yes.
Now, that's all in your past. We want to talk about the present stuff here. This is a book called No Regrets, The Life of Edith Piaf. Now, in a certain sense, when I first saw this, I said, why? Why did this woman do another, book about Edith Piaf? There must be a lot of them. And your, if you will, justification, your reason was that previous books have left a lot out.
Yes, a great deal. Also, I was very fortunate in that a whole lot of new material came to light just a few years ago. A wonderful cache of over 100 letters by Edith Piaf to the man who was her spiritual mentor and teacher. These letters were released in France and were available for the first time, so that the earlier biographers didn't have the benefit of them, and they allow us to see her in a new light.
Now, the things that you feel have been left out in people writing about her in the past include the matter of her courage in defying the Nazis by sheltering Jewish friends and working in the resistance. That has been left out. I
think that's a very, very important thing to emphasize, particularly because there were innuendos about her at the time when she more or less had to go to Germany to perform in the prisoner of war camp.
Yes.
To entertain the French prisoners. What she did, as you know, is make use of those trips to help the resistance cell manufacture false identity papers by having herself photographed with these prisoners and then returning to Paris and having blow-ups of their heads made so that they could have phony IDs that literally helped quite a number of them escape from the Stalags.
Yeah, the final total was in excess of 100, about 118, right. I think.
And when she was called up to give an explanation of her activities during the war, as you know, there are lots of what they called purge panels after the war. Mm-hmm. The people who examined her and took the testimony at the end not only exonerated her of any charges of collaboration, but said, "Congratulations, bravo, Madame Piaf."
One of the other things left out of these books is the fact that she was continually, it seems to me, as I read the book, continually mentoring other singers, writers, composers. I mean, it's a very generous spirit.
That's correct. I'm so glad that that was clear to you. I wanted to emphasize her tremendous generosity to others. Because she had had this early mentoring herself, she must have gotten the idea that what you did was you pass on what you've been able to learn and you give to others, which is such a rare thing.
Yeah.
Not to say that she didn't have a few rivalries and some jealousy of certain singers, but in the main, she was very, very positive and generous towards younger artists.
The other thing is that she herself was a lyricist.
That's right.
This is all amazing.
I know. We've had
I mean, my knowledge are totally superficial. And it's a great pleasure to get into a book like this.
Well, most people don't know and had no way to know that she wrote nearly 100 songs of her own, which is all the more remarkable given that she was a poor girl from the streets with practically no education. She taught herself, in part by collaborating with her early composers and songwriter friends, how to write a story that could be turned into a lyric.
There's one more area of omission that I'm going to get into when we come back. And you just don't hear much talk about Edith Piaf's spirituality. We're going to check that out when we return.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email JimFosterCoc@gmail.com.
Today we're talking about one of the world's greatest singers, or is the word chanteuse?
Yes, it is.
Chanteuse, one of the most famous, greatest chanteuses in the history of music. Her name, of course, is Edith Piaf. The name of the book is No Regrets, The Life of Edith Piaf. And we're talking to the author of that book, one Carolyn Burke. Library Journal knows something about books, and they have some nice things to say about this one. Most data on Piaf are paradoxical, they write, focused on her self-destructive qualities and relationships with men. Burke goes beyond this depiction by providing a more linear and objective narrative while debunking many myths, including some Piaf conjured up herself. Well, Edith. Burke does not idealize her subject, no, or overlook Piaf's flaws. Her main focus is highlighting aspects of the artist that are rarely mentioned, such as Piaf's aiding Jews during World War II. Now, one of the things that struck me as strange, and maybe you can help me on this, is that with respect to her parents, she did a wonderful job throughout her life taking care of them, giving them money and whatever they needed, as she did for many, many people. She's incredible in that respect. But you write or report that to the very end of his life, she had love and showed love for her father. Not so in the case of her mother. And I don't understand that.
Well, it's quite true, according to all accounts. And the reason underlying her dislike of her mother, because it has to be put that way, is her feelings about her mother having left her when she was such a young child. She felt that her mother had abandoned her when she was an infant, which was more or less...
That's pretty true, but you also have to report that when the father took over and she went vagabonding with him, I think that's the word, that from time to time he beat her.
Yes, apparently that didn't cause her to dislike her father. That seemed like a normal thing to her in that day and age. And perhaps he laid off as she got older and more independent in her teenage years, because she did retain a tremendous affection for her father and even a certain pride in him. I suppose she felt that he, however bad he was, he never abandoned her as the mother did.
Was there any, in your research, did you discover any kind of competition between mother and daughter with respect to singing?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Once Edith became well known in the late 30s and 40s, her mother came back into her life after such a long absence and first tried to extract money from her, which Edith did arrange to have given to her on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. And then she began singing Edith's own songs. So the mother was quite troublesome. Suddenly your mother shows up on your doorstep and starts poaching your songs.
Well, if we went to church on Sunday, it would be very, very unlikely to find Edith Piaf in the pews. But you write that she had a very serious level of spirituality to her.
That's true. It's a little hard to define in traditional terms, although she was indeed brought up a Roman Catholic and had her favorite saints, including Saint Teresa of Lisieux, whom she believed was the reason that she regained her sight in childhood after she went through a period of near blindness. So she was quite devoted to Saint Teresa, and she had her own private devotional practices. Apparently, Piaf would go into a church whenever she had a spare moment or was in a time of spiritual despair. She would go into a church, quietly sit down and pray. She didn't necessarily attend the regular services, as you said.
Yeah, she was not into the ritual aspects.
No, but she had a thirst for a connection to something larger than daily life and to the notion of the divine, which isn't often mentioned, as you said.
Mm-hmm. One of the other things that you express very, very beautifully in characterizing her, throughout her life, you write, Piaf clung to the idea of unconditional love, the tender, faithful, sweet affection that she sought for the rest of her life in her chosen companions. And then you get to Marcel Cerdan.
Yes.
And was that not it?
She thought it was it. Yes, she thought that she had found that tender, sweet kind of companion.
In a boxer.
In a boxer of all people.
A championship welterweight boxer.
It's a very interesting story. They met when both of them were at the height of their reputation, and they met as equals in New York in 1947, when they were both keen on conquering America, so to speak. And one of the things that her friend said about Edith was that she could form such a strong bond to Cerdan, in part because he didn't need anything from her. All the other men she'd known needed something, needed to make their names, needed to take advantage of her in one way or another. He was just there and loved her for herself. I think that's a different kind of relationship that I can imagine as being very, very comforting to her.
Mm-hmm. As a young singer, she was very much a rough diamond, or a diamond in the rough.
Yes.
And she needed help from the gentleman by the name of Raymond Osso.
That's correct.
And we're going to look at his contribution to her when we return.
You're listening to Conversations on the Coast with Jim Foster. Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email jimfostercoc@gmail.com.
No Regrets, The Life of Edith Piaf. And that's the book today. The author is with us, Carolyn Burke. And one of the things we like to do from time to time on the program to shut me up is to have the author read from the book. So, and you've picked out a section. Could you give us some context before you start reading?
Yes, I'm going to read about the day that Edith Piaf was discovered by a nightclub owner.
Le Play.
singing
Good, that's great.
Singing in the streets, and he was the first to ask her to perform in a legitimate cabaret nightclub.
Good. You're on.
One grey day in October 1935, Edith decided to work the area near the Arc de Triomphe in the Rue Troyon. As she warbled a song called Comme un moineau, like a sparrow, passers-by may have reflected that its image of a poor hooker, elle est née comme un moineau, elle a vécu comme un moineau, elle mourra comme un moineau. She was born like a sparrow, she's lived like a sparrow, she'll die like a sparrow, suited the singer's waifish appearance. A well-groomed bystander with silvery hair declared that she would ruin her voice if she kept belting out songs that way. When Edith said that she sang in order to eat, he introduced himself as Louis Leplay and asked her to audition at his cabaret, Le Gernis. Leplay gave her 5 francs and an appointment a few days later.
What a great moment for her.
Indeed. She begins her own memoir with that particular day. Shall I continue a little bit?
Sure.
She noted his elegant manners and the tender blue of his eyes, marks of distinction in a man where she was concerned, as well as his limp from a war injury. Above all, she was impressed by his kindness. I put all my heart into my song, she recalled, not so much to get an engagement, which seemed unlikely, as to please the man who had shown an interest in me and with whom I now felt a mutual trust and sympathy. After hearing her, Leplay asked whether she could start on October 24th at 40 francs a night, a huge sum. He had 2 requirements. She was to learn some new songs and wear something more presentable.
What was she wearing?
A poor skirt and a ragged sweater. Edith accepted on the spot, promising to finish the sweater she was knitting. Piaf continued to knit throughout her career, but most projects were never completed. Her stage name came as an afterthought. She must have a name to match what Leplay felt as he watched her. A true Paris sparrow, she should be called La Môme Moineau, which means kid sparrow, but that name was taken. Why not use the slang for sparrow, which was Piaf? The singer remarked years later, I was baptized for life.
What a great moment. What a great moment for her.
Yes.
Whoa. And with that, she's on her way. Well, no, that would be in the moving pictures. She wasn't, quite on her way.
No, she had many ups and downs, and a very serious down after Leplay was murdered.
Yeah. Crazily, she's held for his murder. I mean, there was no evidence.
No, not at all. The only link was that he was known to have underworld connections in Pigalle, the very seedy, sordid part of Paris where she lived, and she was known to have some underground connections herself.
Well, so, everyone in Pigalle had underground connections.
I know. The police were just picking on her.
Now, she, when we ended the last segment, I was talking about how she could be described at the early part of her career as a very, very rough but brilliant diamond. And she needed people to polish her up. And one of the people who came into her life to do that was a gentleman by the name of Raymond Assou.
Yes.
And it took him, she writes, 3 years to cure me, 3 years of patient affection to teach me that there was another world beyond that of prostitutes and pimps. 3 years to cure me of Pigalle, of my chaotic childhood, to become a woman and a star, instead of a phenomenon with a voice that people listen to as if being shown, a rare animal at a fair. And that's beautifully said, because it gives one a sense of the great distance that had to be traveled.
At which she traveled so quickly, thanks to Raymond Assou and also to her dear friend Jacques Bourgeat, the mentor we spoke of earlier, whose correspondence I've found so precious for my book. These 2 men really taught her. Assou said he tamed her. He saw her as something of a wild creature, feral. And
yeah, that word feral is, I guess, very, very appropriate in this case.
Indeed. And Assou gave her the education that she so craved but had never had because of her itinerant and impoverished childhood. So between the two of them, they brought her into other realms that she had barely suspected, but that she took to because she was so intelligent. As you say, quite a rough diamond. For example, with Bourgeois, she read the classics of French poetry. It's hard to think of that wild street creature reading Baudelaire, Rimbaud, and Verlaine, but she did.
She did. She really, really did. One of the other persons, men, that had influence on her was Cocteau.
Yes, that too.
That amazes me.
Isn't that surprising?
Yeah.
I was absolutely thrilled to find out about that friendship, which was a true friendship. I went into the Cocteau archives in Paris and read the letters between them and read everything that he wrote about her, because he wrote a good bit, as you saw in the book, on her development as a singer. Yes. And in fact, it was Cocteau who gave her a promotion of sorts because he decided that she was a nightingale. She was France's nightingale, which is a big step up from being the sparrow.
Absolutely. Coming really, really up.
Also, he wrote a play for her in which she performed quite successfully, a one-woman play. She was the only speaker, although there was another person on stage. And it was a great surprise that she was such a good actress.
Sounds like the kind of part that I could play. No words. We've been talking about a book about Edith Piaf. It's called No Regrets, The Life of Edith Piaf. And if you think you know Edith Piaf, I'm telling you right now, if you haven't read this book, you don't know. Remember the name, No Regrets, The Life of Edith Piaf, written by Carolyn Burke. This has been Conversations on the Coast, and I'm Jim Foster.
Now you can find this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, and all your favorite digital outlets. Follow the show on Twitter at JimFosterCoc and email JimFosterCoc@gmail.com.